Hey, Mr. Riley here with the first topic in our unit on percents, Unit 6. So in the last unit, we used proportions, and so we're going to start percents with a discussion and use of the percent proportion. The percent proportion is kind of the definition of percent. Okay, a percent is taking a number out of 100. So any fraction or any part of a whole, you can write as a percent out of 100, and that is the percent proportion. Part over whole equals percent over 100. And in these problems, typically you will be given, two of these numbers, the part, the whole, and the percent, and you're calculating the third one. There's a number of ways to do these, but today we're going to just talk about the percent proportion because it is the way that you can solve every type of percent problem. All right, so first one, 12 is what percent of 32? 12 is what percent of 32? So they give you the two numbers here, 12 and 32. 12 is the part, okay? And so 12 over 32, part over whole, is equal to what out of 100? And that P here, will be your percent answer. So you can cross multiply to solve this proportion. 12 times 100 equals 32 times P. You don't have to rewrite it again. Divide both sides by 32, and your answer is 37.5%. So the answer comes out as a percent, and 12 out of 32 is 37.5%. I know there are easier ways to do this, and we will discuss them in future topics, but we're going to start with the percent proportion, which is the way you can solve every type of percent problem. Okay, so with that example, there are 4 got-its here for you to work on your own. Number 1, 15 is what percent of 20? So your percent proportion looks like this. 15 out of 20 equals what out of 100? Cross multiply, divide by 20. And you get 75%. You might have known that one off the top of your head, which is fine. We'll talk about that more later on in the unit. Letter B, 100 is what percent of 25? Now, which number is the part and which is the whole can sometimes be confusing. It is not always that the part is the smaller of the two numbers, okay? Because sometimes the percent is greater than 100%. So the number that comes after the word of is typically the whole. We'll talk more about that in another slide. Okay, so 100 is the part and 25 is the whole. So 100 over 25 equals what over 100? And again, this one, the math is so easy. You could probably just do it in your head with the equivalent fractions, which is fine. But to properly solve the proportion, you cross multiply and then divide both sides by 25. And you get 400%. 100 is 400% of 25, 4 times as much as 25. That's what 400% means. Letter C. What percent of 5 is 12? 5 out of 12. What percent of 5 is 12? So of 5 means 5 is the whole and 12 is the part. 12 is 240% of 5, right? If your part is bigger than the whole, then your percent is going to be bigger than 100%. 100% is 1, when the part and the whole are exactly the same number. What percent of 18 is 9? You probably should just be able to answer this one right off the top of your head. 9 out of 18 is what out of 100? We will not require you to write the steps for problems like this. Instead, you can just write your answer. The answer is 50%. All right, so these problems we're all finding the percent. Given the part and the whole, find the percent. The next type of problem, what number is 15.5% of 450? So this, because they give you the percent and the number after of, which is the whole, is looking for the part. Now the book says let A represent the part. I typically will use P for part or X. You could obviously use any letter that you want. So set up your percent proportion. X over 450, part, unknown part, divided by whole, equals percent over 100, 15.5 out of 100. The word percent means out of 100, so that's where this side of the proportion comes from. Cross multiply, so you always get 100 times A in these types of problems when you're looking for the part. 100A equals 450 times 15.5, which comes out to 69.75. You can use a calculator for all of these problems. Okay, so you can always use a calculator for these. So the answer is 69.75. That's 15.5% of 450. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's 10%. Well, this 10% is 45. We'll talk more about that in a future topic. Okay, but 15%, less than a quarter, right? Less than 25% of 450. So that's a good number. Okay. When you divide by 100 here, we notice we didn't show the step to divide by 100. That's because dividing by 100, all you do is move the decimal place 2 places to the left, right? Dividing by 10, every time you divide by 10, moves the decimal point 1 place to the left. So divide by 10, divide by 100, move the decimal point 2 places to the left. You do not need a calculator to divide by 100. Okay, 4 of these for you to do. What number is 11.4% of 330? So P, the part, is what we're looking for. Out of 330 equals 11.4 out of 100. Cross multiply, divide by 100 by moving the decimal place 2 places to the left, and 37.62 is 11.4% of 330. Letter B, find 10.5% of 30. 10% of 30 is going to be about 3, so your answer should be somewhere around 3. P, part, divided by whole of 30 equals 10.5 out of 100, percent over 100. Cross multiply, 10.5 times 30 is 315, divide by 100, 3.15, 3.15. Letter C, what is 15.3% of 425? Part over 425 equals 15.3 out of 100. Cross multiply, 6502.5 is 15.3 times 425. Divide both sides by 100. So you can do that in your head here. Move the decimal point 2 places. You get 65.025. Don't round typically unless you are directed to do that in the instructions, or if this, ended up being a huge, ridiculous decimal, then, round it off to something reasonable. But if it ends after 3 or 4 decimal places, you can just write out the whole thing. What number is 63.4% of 12? So 63.4 is the percent, so it's that over 100 equals what out of 12? Cross multiply. 100p equals 12 times 63.4. That's 760.8. Move the decimal point to divide by 100, 7.608. All right, the last type of problem you can get is finding the whole. So they give you the part and the percent. And the whole is typically the number that comes after the word of. Now, there are other times in word problems and things where you're going to see other words, other parts of the problem that have the word of in it. But if you just go to a blank is blank percent of blank, the number after of is the whole. And so if it says of what number, then the whole is the unknown, and that is what you are looking for. So 78 is the part, and 60 is the percent, obviously, because there's a percent sign. So 78 out of what? They used a B here. I use W or X again for the unknown whole. Equals 60 over 100. Cross multiply. And again, you don't have to write this line. divide both sides by 60, right, to get B by itself here, and you get 130. 78 is 60% of 130. So again, the whole usually comes after the word of. 4 of these for you to do. 30% of what number is 63? So 63 is 30% of what? 63 out of what equals 30 out of 100. Cross multiply. Divide by 30. W equals 210. Letter B, 3,000 is 60% of what number? 3,000 out of what is 60 out of 100? Cross multiply. 3 with 5 zeros, 3 here and 2 here. Divide by 60. And the whole here is 5,000. Makes sense? 3,000 out of 5,000 is 60 out of 100. That's 3/5, 60%, which we will talk about more later. Letter C, 45 is 3% of what? Okay, 3%, not very big, so this number should be fairly large. That 45 is 3% of 45 out of what equals 3 out of 100. Cross multiply. 4,500 equals 3W. Divide by 3. And 4,500 divided by 3 is 1,500. You should be able to do that one in your head. 1,500. 45 is 3% of 1,500. And letter D, 18% of what number is 126? 18% over 100 equals 126 over what? Cross multiply. Divide to get your answer of 700. All right, so these are straightforward number problems, not real world problems. Blank is blank percent of blank, and they'll give you 2 of the numbers and the other one you're trying to find. You can always do this by setting up the percent proportion. Okay, so there's 3 types of problems: finding the percent, finding the part, or finding the whole. So we'll end with a couple of real-world problems here. Here's a real-world example. The table shows batting statistics for Derek Jeter, 1 season. So it's pretty old, obviously. 639 at-bats. What percent of what percent of his at-bats were singles? Round your answer to the nearest tenth, it says, because this one's going to come out to a bizarro decimal. So what are we looking for here? Well, they're asking for what is the percent. So that means they must be giving you the part and the whole. He had 639 at-bats. That would be the total, because it's what percent of his total at-bats. And the singles from the table over here is 151. Now that's 639 total. Sometimes you'll see problems where they don't give you this total, right? But they give you all of the parts here, and you may have to add these all up to get the total. In this problem, they were nice, and they added them up for you and told you that it was 639. So now we can set up the proportion. Part over whole equals percent over 100. So cross multiply, 151 times 100 and 639 times P. Again, you don't have to write this more than once. You write it on the next line, and you divide both sides by 639, and you get in your calculator, again, use a calculator for all of these, 23.63067293, okay, and it might go on further than that. That's why they told you to round to the nearest tenth. So your answer is 23.6, and since it's a percent, and your box really should be here because your answer should have a percent sign. Okay, so there you go. 23.6% is the answer. 23.6%. Now, check for reasonableness. You know, like kind of always when you're working with numbers like that, does my answer make sense? Because if you put in your calculator the wrong way, you might end up getting some kind of goofy number. 160 out of 640. Oh, just randomly, I guess you're supposed to know that's at 1/4, because 16 out of 24, I guess. So, just look at numbers that kind of make sense. 150s, half of 300. So it's about 1/4 of 600. So the answer ought to be somewhere around 1/4, a little less, 23.6%. Okay. All right. So a couple of got it problems. So continuing on with the Derek Jeter statistics, to the nearest 10th, what percent of his at-bats were strikeouts? So in all real-world problems, you have to kind of set, well, what am I looking for? Blank is what percent of what? Okay. So are they here? You are given the percent. You're given the strikeouts is the part, right? And the whole is the total, and you're asking for what percent. So when the question asks what percent, it's pretty obvious then that the two numbers they're giving you are the part and the whole. But which one is which? After the word of is the whole. So you're looking for 100 strikeouts out of 639 at bats, right? So luckily they already gave you that 639. So you're finding the percent, set up the percent proportion. 100 out of 639 is what out of 100? Cross multiply. 639 times x equals 10,000. Divide by 639. So 10,000 divided by 639 is 15.649452227, blah, 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 blah. But the instructions say round to the nearest 10th. So your final answer is 15.6%, approximately. Okay, so he struck out about 15.6% of the time. And he got hits like 23% of the time. Last example. The number of mutual funds that increased in value during the third quarter was 15. If this is 60% of the total number of mutual funds offered, how many mutual funds were offered? So what they're telling you is that 15 is 60% of the total. So what are we looking for in this problem? The percent, the part, or the whole? You are given the percent and the part. You are looking for the whole, because after the word of, they don't give you a number, right? Of the total number that you don't know. So we're looking for the whole. So the percent proportion for this one, 15 out of what is 60 out of 100? Cross multiply. 60 times W equals 1,500. Divide by 60, and you get 25. So, real world problem, real world, it needs a word in the answer. So how many mutual funds were answered? The answer is 25 funds. So 15 is 60% of 25. All right, so again, there's three types of problems here: finding the percent, finding the part, or finding the whole. And there are easier ways to do a lot of these percent problems in all different types. We will look at those ways in the coming days. But this way is the one that will always work. No matter how weird the numbers are or whatever, use the percent proportion and you can find the part, the whole, or the percent when you're given the other two numbers.